If you look to the screen, we've got a short video clip.
Good morning, everybody. Morning. What a great Sunday together so far. I'm looking forward to the message this morning, but just have loved worshiping with you, some exciting stuff to celebrate together as a church as well. And I think this morning's message will probably be challenging to a lot of us. I hope it'll be encouraging and affirming, but I think we're going to walk away with a healthy, holy burden for proclaiming Jesus, making Jesus known to the people in our lives. Because that's the task we've been given. You and I, if we are followers of Jesus, we are his witnesses. Just like his first disciples were. He sent them out as his witnesses. They were the eyewitnesses and the ear witnesses. They had heard what he taught and they wrote it down for us. They had seen what he did and they recorded it for us. They told everyone, everywhere that they went. But just as we saw in the video, the assignment has also been given to us. You and I have experienced Jesus in our life. We know about him, and so we also can be a witness, a reliable witness to his reality, who he is in the world, and the fact that he wants a growing relationship with every single person that he made and that he loves. And we get the opportunity to represent him in that way. Now, last week, we personalized this. We don't just want to talk about people and the world and culture, but we really want to personalize it to the people God has put on our heart and in our life. And so we considered, who is it that is my person? Who particularly do I want to witness about Jesus to? And it could be, because of the way Bridget led us this morning, it's the same person that you prayed for and that you sang over this morning. The person in your family or in your group of friends that God has put on your heart. It could be a different person. And even if you weren't here last week, there's time still to catch up. I think the commitment that we made to God and to ourselves will be on the screen there. What we finished with last week was to name for ourselves. My person is blah, blah, whatever their name is. I had mine. I had my person's name locked in. You had your person's name locked in. This is my person. And I will be a witness this week by... what is it that you are going to do? And I wonder how it went. So I had my person and I had my opportunity, and there's no particularly interesting or exciting story to tell you about that. I'd love it if there was. But I had a second surprise opportunity this week that I do want to tell you about. On Tuesday, my kids were off to school for, second day of school, fantastic. And Laura was doing some study, and so I went to play golf. How wonderful. And so I booked a tea time when there was no one else booked in, so I could play by myself and just have some quiet, peaceful time. And when I turned up in the pro shop, they said, "You're playing today with Sean." And I said, "Who the heck's Sean?" Because, I was inspired by the series that we're in. I thought this would be a great chance to proclaim Jesus, and I thought, that's not what I had in mind at all. I was going to play by myself with Jesus. Now I have to play with Jesus and Sean. Anyway, he's waiting for you outside. I'm like, all right. So anyway, I went outside. Turns out Sean's a really nice guy. Turns out Sean plays just as badly as I do. And so we got on really well. He was in a cart driving, and I was walking, but still in a stop-start kind of way, we managed to have a bit of a conversation about the AFL teams we support, about our own kids, about our work. And this is where I have both an advantage and a disadvantage with you. Because I get to say that I'm a pastor of a church, which most of the time kills the conversation. That's a disadvantage. But sometimes, as it did on Tuesday, it gives an extra opportunity. He goes, I used to go to church. I grew up going to church as a kid. And so I asked him a few questions about that, and he told me some stories. And so, all right, I'm a witness of Jesus. This guy used to go to church. He doesn't anymore. What should my next question be? Why don't you go to church anymore? Or how did that change in your life? Or, what does spirituality look like for you in your life right now? Or what do you think about Jesus these days? Which one of those four do you reckon I went with? None of them. None of them. I missed my window of opportunity, and then we got interrupted, and then the round was over, and we parted ways. Now, this would have been a much better story if on the third hole, I'd talked to him about Jesus. On the fifth hole, he got on his knees and then he prayed, and on the seventh hole, I baptized him while he was trying to collect the golf balls that we hit into the water. But no, I wish I'd witnessed more. And I wonder if you've ever felt that way before, or maybe you even felt like it this week. That you went out with your commitment like I did, but you wish you'd witness more. And there are a few things that help me process this and help me process my shortcomings and my mistakes and my failures in this. The first is that it's okay. That I don't share about Jesus or witness about Jesus to try and earn his love or make him pleased with me. It's okay to just simply be a child of God and not get it right or do it well all the time. It's okay. He still loves me, and if I have made a mistake, he forgives me. The other thing is that I can trust God to use even the smallest seed of faith that I help plant in someone else's life. I can trust him, that I can do just my small part, and who knows who else is in Sean's life, and who knows how else God's Spirit is working in Sean's heart. That even the small, and I would say pretty, pathetic attempt that I made as a witness, that God can use that and I can trust him to use that. And the third thing is that I know that I'm a witness, but I'm not an evangelist. And last week we unpacked that difference a little bit, that for every follower of Jesus, we're all asked to be witnesses of him, to represent him and make him known. But there are some of us that we have a particular grace or a particular gift to be an evangelist and actually use our words more specifically in a more overt, more targeted way, and God will use that in our life. Now, we could all try, we could all have a go at it, but just like all of the spiritual gifts, some of us have a particular grace for this in our life. And if you have that gift, if you just think you might have that gift, or if you want that gift, you should go for it. Just have a go, just speak up and see how God uses you in that way. But I am at peace with knowing I don't have that spiritual gift, but I can still be a witness of who Jesus is and what he's done in my life. And so I don't feel like I have to speak up in an overt way all the time, but I still have to process that and go, I wish I witnessed more. I wish I had been a little bit more ready. And this is what the Apostle Peter wrote in one of his letters in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. He said, "You must worship Christ as Lord of your life. And if someone asks about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it. But do this in a gentle and respectful way." So I want to be ready. I want to be ready to explain the hope that I have. And this verse inspires me to do that in any opportunity I have, to be ready to answer a question or explain the hope I have in a gentle and respectful way. But some of you, despite what I've already said so far, are still sitting here thinking, why? Like, why can't I just live my life and my faith be a personal thing? Why do I have to carry this responsibility? Like, I didn't sign up for a multi-level marketing scheme. I don't like handing out unsolicited pamphlets, and I don't like having hard conversations. So why are we talking about this? I don't want to be a witness or an evangelist. But like we saw in the video at the start, this is the lifestyle of a follower of Jesus. That he's not a limited edition that only a few of us can have a version of. He wants to be in everybody's life. He wants us to represent him to the whole world because his heart is for the whole world. And he wants us to live a life where representing him and making him known is a natural overflow of our own growing relationship with him. I have met the King of Kings. I know the Savior of the universe. I have a personal connection with the Son of God, and I have experienced his grace, and I know his forgiveness, and I have experienced his love. I want other people to have that same experience. I don't want to just keep that to myself. I want other people, especially the person that I know and love in my life. I want that person to also have that same growing relationship with Jesus that I have. And so that's why I identify with what Peter says, to go, yes, I want to worship Christ as Lord of my life. And in any opportunity, I want to be able to give a reason for the hope I have as a believer in a gentle and respectful way. So if I ever play golf with Sean again, I want to be a little bit more prepared than I was on Tuesday. I don't want to ever stay stuck in disappointment or regret, but I just want to be a little bit more ready next time. But shouldn't it be easier than that? Like, why does it take work? And this is where I come to a great quote from a pastor in Melbourne, Dale Stevenson from Crossway Baptist Church. He says, "The bad news is like diarrhea. The good news is constipated. You need to work hard to get it out." Bad news just spreads quickly everywhere. Oh, have you heard about? Did you know about? Bad news, it just spreads. But good news sometimes takes a fair bit of work to get it out. And the message about Jesus is called the good news in the New Testament. It's the gospel, the good news, the euangelion. And so I should be able to speak the good news about Jesus in a free and natural way, but there are times when I need to put some work into being prepared. In Romans chapter 10, verse 13, Paul has this beautiful progression about us sharing the good news. He says that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. But how can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they've never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? And how can anyone go and tell them without being sent? This beautiful progression that ends with everyone who responds to Jesus and calls on his name will be saved. He's ready for everyone. He wants to be in a relationship with everyone. And right back at the start of the progression is you and I, we are sent. Jesus said, just as the Father has sent me, so I send you to go and be my witnesses. And so let's get a bit more practical. What could I have actually said? What could you actually say the next time you have an opportunity with your person, the person in your life? Now, what you might be thinking of is what I learned as a young man is some 6-point plan. That if you can just memorize this and lead someone through the 6-point plan, or a diagram, that if you could just draw this bridge across these two things and explain it that way, that might be your go-to. Or it might be a tract, a printed pamphlet, a tract like the Roman Road or the 4 Spiritual Laws or Are You Good Enough to Go to Heaven? They're good things, but the problem with those things that you may have learned is they were written for a different world. We talked about that different world last week, that we don't live in that world where people have this basic understanding and all they need is for someone to help them seal the deal with Jesus. It's a very good chance the person in your life didn't grow up going to church, doesn't have that basic understanding, and even if they have the basic knowledge, they are not there in their beliefs. And so we have to start in a different place because the world has changed and the person in your life has changed. And so the questions that were being asked in the 1950s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s and even in the 2010s aren't being asked anymore. But they're still asking questions, and maybe even more so now than they were in the 2010s and in the 2000s. Because people are starting to realize what they were sold as the new atheism, the Richard Dawkins God is dead atheism, that there's some serious questions about that in people's experience of spirituality and their understanding of the world. And so people are starting to ask more questions. The research we showed last week in Australia shows that warmth towards Christianity is steady, even higher, even greater now than it was 14 years ago. And so in the midst of all of that, and your person is shifting as well. Your person is changing as well, and you may have not realized that yet if you've been trying for years. So in that changing world and those new questions, the Aussie evangelist Sam Chan says, the best thing we can do is tell a better story. Instead of arguing with people about science, because that's often a distraction, instead of arguing with people about ethics, like abortion or gender or sexuality, they're important things, but instead of arguing about those things, because you're not going to introduce someone to Jesus while you're arguing about stuff. Instead, what if we kept the conversation back to a better story about who Jesus is? Because Jesus himself said in John chapter 14, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. And so if we're talking about what is the gospel, what is the good news, well, it's not an idea. It's not an ethic, and it's not even a series of truths. At its core, the gospel, the good news, is a person. It's Jesus. If we've got one goal, it's not to communicate truth to someone, it's to introduce them to the truth. If we've got one goal, it's not to show someone the right way to live their life, it's to introduce them to the way into the life. It's to introduce them to Jesus. And so we need to tell a better story about Jesus. Okay, well, that's great, Geoff, but I'm not a storyteller. And I say, that's okay. You don't have to come up with the stories. They're already written. You already know them. And so what if the next time you had an opportunity with the person that's on your heart, the next time you had an opportunity, just a little window of opportunity to talk about your faith or talk about spirituality, what if you told them a story about Jesus' life from the New Testament? Your favorite story. I wonder what that would be. Let's just pause for 30 seconds right now. If you had a window of opportunity, let's pretend that I'm your person. I'm the person in your life that you've been praying for and that you'd love to represent Jesus to. And we're having a conversation, and I say something like, well, tell me, like, why do you believe all this stuff anyway? And you could just tell me one story about Jesus' life. What's your favorite? What's your go-to? What's your favorite story about Jesus? And you go, but Geoff, if I do that, if I just told them my favorite story, then I won't have explained everything about Jesus, and they still won't be able to accept him, or I won't have covered everything. I say, that's okay. You're being a witness, just like he asked you to be. He didn't ask you to explain everything and cover every detail. You're being a witness about him. So tell a better story about Jesus' life. So before we move on, make sure you have in your mind, like, well, what is my favorite story about Jesus? If I just had an open opportunity for 1 minute to tell a story about Jesus, a story from Jesus' life, what would be your go-to story? The other better story you can tell is about Jesus in your life. When and how did Jesus first begin to make sense to you? And not just vague ideas about him, but like why in your life? When did you start to take Jesus seriously? And why do you still follow Jesus, even when other people around you have stopped or maybe never started? Or what changed in your life from before you started following Jesus to now? What difference does he make in your life? You can tell a better story about Jesus in your life. And again, it doesn't need to be long. It doesn't need to be comprehensive. It can just be one thing. What's the next thing that if you had an opportunity, you could share about Jesus in your life? And so again, let's just imagine that I'm your person. And you say to me, so I say to you something like, why do you go to church every Sunday anyway? And your response is, don't necessarily talk about church, talk about Jesus in your life. Just give me 30 seconds. Why is Jesus important to you? Any opportunity you have, any spiritual opening, any spiritual conversation, tell me a better story about Jesus' life, or tell me a better story about Jesus in your life. And so if right now this morning you had that opportunity, that 30-second window of opportunity to tell me one thing about Jesus in your life, what would you tell me? The good news about Jesus is the greatest story ever told. And you and I can retell it. We can tell a better story than the ones we've been trying to tell by just telling a better story about Jesus' life or a better story about Jesus in our life. And so let me finish with one time in the New Testament that someone did this. In John chapter 4, Jesus and his disciples are on their way somewhere. They're walking. It's a long way. And they come upon a well that's outside of a village. And so Jesus says, I'm tired. I'm going to sit down and rest. But you guys go into town and see if you can find us some food. And so Jesus is sitting there in the middle of the day by this well, resting because he's worn out. And his disciples have disappeared to go find some food in the village. And a woman appears. She comes out of the village and she comes up to the well to get water for herself. And Jesus says to her, can you please give me a drink from your bucket? Which sounds normal, but would have been weird and possibly offensive just because of the gender difference and the cultural backgrounds between the two of them. But that leads to a conversation. And in that conversation, Jesus says a whole bunch of different things, and she says a whole bunch of different things. He says to her that he has living water for her thirst for life. And he says that he knows about the pain in her life and the broken relationships and that she's been discarded by the men in her life. And he says to her that I am the Messiah, the Son of God. And at that moment, the disciples come back from town with lunch. And they're shocked that he's speaking to her, and she runs away. Not to get away from the disciples, she runs into town to be a witness to this man that she has just met and had a conversation with. And so what does she say in John chapter 4, verse 29? It'll be on the screen. She says, come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. She tells him a story about Jesus in her life. Could he possibly be the Messiah? A story about Jesus' life. Come and see a man who told me about everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah? And the people came streaming from the village to see him. Did she understand everything about Jesus? Absolutely not. Did she tell them everything about Jesus that she knew? Absolutely not. She was simply a witness to who Jesus is and what he had done in her life. She told a better story. A better story than the people in the village had. She told a better story about who Jesus is and a better story about what he had done in her life. We got one more week in this series. And so this coming week, I wonder if you're up for another commitment with me. My person is whatever their name is. And the next time we get to talk, which could be this week, the next time we get to talk, I want to tell this better story about Jesus' life. Is it one of his parables? Is it an interaction that he had with someone else? Is it something that he did or said? And the next time we talk, if I get even a little window of opportunity, I'd love to tell them this one thing, this better story about Jesus in my life. Now, I'm different because of this. Or everything's changed for me because of this about what Jesus has done. Let's pause for a minute. Pray, invite God to speak to us, and then I'll lead us in prayer before we sing together again. Before we pray, I just want to invite you to have complete freedom in which better stories you pick. You might feel like, oh, I can't tell that one. That's just a frivolous story about Jesus. Or I only like that one because it's interesting, but it doesn't really say much about him, just freedom. So in this time of prayer now, Jesus, I ask that you would just put in our minds a thought or lay on our hearts an idea of what's at the top of our list of our favorite stories from your life. And then from everything you've done in our life, everything we believe, all our experience with you, what's the one thing, our favorite thing that we'd love to share? And God, we believe today that you by your Spirit are at work in the whole world. And you are even at work knocking on the door of people's hearts who have not yet opened themselves up to you. And we just love to join you in that work. That you'd lead us to a person whose heart is beginning to open, and that the two better stories we tell will just be taken by you and planted like seeds in the heart of their life. Watered, growing into a real and genuine relationship with you that changes their entire life and their entire eternity. So we ask that we'd have the courage, and we ask that you would give us the inspiration, and that you'd help us to have the discipline to be prepared for our next opportunity as your witness. In your name, amen.